Ames, Arlen's, Bradley's, Lechmere, Mammoth Mart. All just a small part of the big family of discount chains that hailed from Massachusetts. Hey, wait, we're missing one. Can you guess what it is? This chain peaked as the 4th largest discounter in the country, was the biggest of all these chains, and finally still has a presence in markets around the world. I'm talking about Zayre. Stick around to learn the very good history of this revolutionary company and what remains of them today. The year is 1919. Focus on Jewish immigrants Max and Morris Feldberg. They came with their mother from Russia in the early 1900s and settled in Chelsea, Massachusetts. Here, they founded a small hosiery and underwear wholesaling business, the New England Trading Company. They sold to both small specialty retailers and major department stores. Business was high through the Great Depression, and by the 1930s, they'd started a specialty retail store of their own, called Bell Shops. As it grew, they branched outside of underwear and stocked a variety of women's apparel. Their momentum was steady and was fueled by taking over competitors. Bell Shops were found throughout many New England cities and began competing with big chains like Lerner Shops. The brothers held their own and grew the chain to 30 locations by the end of 1945. The next year, they bought out New York City chain Nugent's and doubled their store count. Bell Shops was a success, but in the 50s, the tides were changing. Consumer taste was rapidly moving from established outfits to modern supermarkets and chains. On the one hand, you had titans like E.J. Corvette, the first discount department store, taking business from legacy brands. On the other hand, you had mill stores. These were small retailers based in old textile mills. Very popular in the Northeast, rent was cheap, and their products were inexpensive. Their company overhead was little enough that it became a superpower. Mill stores became a big problem for Bell Shops. Many of their New Age competitors began life as a mill store, but grew into modern discount superstores. The Feldberg brothers, now joined by their sons, Stanley and Sumner, saw a need for change and stayed with this curve. Sumner studied the history of retailing at Harvard, and his dutiful analysis of the current marketplace gave them a clear path forward. He pulled them away from mill stores, which he saw as a fad, and pushed them into supermarkets. This was a genius play. He was right. Mill stores faded away, and supermarkets became the norm of the industry. They planned for new construction with good curb appeal, specifically designed for big box retail. The Feldbergs took their chance in '55, when grocery chain Stop & Shop knocked at their door. They were building a new supermarket in Hyannis, Massachusetts, with a vacant space right next door. This offer gave the ultimate curb appeal, right alongside an established and popular chain. The Feldbergs developed a new store with all the bells and whistles of the modern discounter. Allegedly, they named it after an unassuming phone call. The team was spitballing names when Max stopped to take a call. He ended it with Sehr gut, which means very good in Yiddish. As written in the New York Times, the men stared at one another. Zayre. Let's spell it Zayre for very good. On September 20th, 1956, they opened the first Zayre department store in Hyannis. It had 5,000 square feet of retail space and operated on self-service, at the time still a fairly new concept. It had all the makings of an overnight success, and it was. Stanley Feldberg was president and oversaw the opening of the second Zayre at Legion Shopping Center in Roslindale, a 39,000 square foot location anchored on each side by two of the most popular chains in the country, A&P and Woolworth. As time passed, Zayre's average footprint grew closer to 100,000 square feet. These stores were huge for the time. Fittingly, Zayre as a chain grew huge as well. By 1962, Zayre had 27 stores and committed to opening at least 10 new locations every following year. They grew too big for the Northeast alone, and the Feldbergs planted Zayre stores across nearly every state in the East and Midwest. Just 4 years later, they had 92 locations. While the early Zayre stores were focused mainly on clothing, they went on to incorporate more hardline goods. Like earlier with Bell shops, much of Zayre's growth came from takeovers of smaller chains. Another area they were succeeding in was specialty retail. A young competitor grabbed their attention, Hit or Miss. They sold upscale fashion at off-price. That is, they bought overproduced clothing from manufacturers at a discount, then sold it at a markdown, off-price. In doing so, they made more money overall than the stores selling the same clothing at regular prices. Over the last few years, the chain had exploded in popularity, leading Zayre to buy them out in '69. Hit or Miss became their moneymaker. Zayre also ran Shoppers City, which was an early hypermarket carrying groceries, as well as Beacon Way Fabrics and Warwick Shoppers World. In 1970, they launched Spree, a discount toy chain, which didn't fare well against Toys R Us and Child World, and was closed in '76. Hit or Miss proved majorly successful during the early '70s recession, with more people stretching their money. Discount was heating up. With 232 department stores and counting, Zayre dotted the major markets of over 26 states. It may not have been possible to be the biggest. Kmart had over 1,000 locations, and competition from them was fierce. Another growing out of Massachusetts was Ames, a chain of around 23 stores. Their growth too was spurred on by acquisitions, and they'd soon be another unavoidable competitor. But specialty retail remained a big source of profit. They decided to expand more into off-price. Zayre attempted to purchase Marshalls, at the time the leading off-price family fashion chain. In the end, Marshalls was absorbed into the Melville Corporation, who also ran CVS. Zayre leadership figured if you can't join them, beat them. They hired Bernard Camarada, former Marshalls VP of Merchandising, to help develop a Marshalls copycat. What came out of this brainstorm was a little store called TJ Maxx. It was another overnight success. Zayre had become a billion-dollar company, but on the road there, the stores had dropped in quality. Sales were down and change was necessary. The Feldbergs hired Maurice Segal, vice president of American Express, as president and CEO of Zayre. He was the first non-family member to hold the position, and soon rolled out his plans to revitalize the chain. First was to focus more on urban markets, which was a big piece of profit. For example, in Chicago, they took over old, unprofitable venture stores and turned them into money-making machines. Next, they cut the fat. Warwick Shoppers World, Beacon Way, Nugent's, and Bell shops all had to go. Then was a $40 million makeover of Zayre. They brought the growing market of warehouse retail to the Northeast with BJ's Wholesale Club in '84. They also ran Chadwick's of Boston, which sold off-price clothing through catalogs. They even tried their hands at home improvement stores with Home Club. They continued growing Zayre throughout the decade, but customers were subjected to unpleasant conditions. Many of the stores were unkempt and mismanaged. The 1985 buyout of Gaylord's department store bloated the company with debt, and the stores that came from that buyout had the same problems as the others. Zayre was unappealing to many customers. They lost a lot of market share, and their profits began to freefall. Segal said, "We have to go back to not being sloppy. If this could be done effectively, would it be worth the trouble? The price tag on such a fixer-upper would no doubt hurt their other divisions. Zayre ran on outdated tech, and their stores had trouble moving inventory. Aside from the decline in quality, there was still brutal competition. Kmart was a spectacle in terms of size and business, and where it wasn't Kmart country, it was Walmart country. After a series of buyouts, Ames had just as many stores as Zayre. Corporate was faced with a conundrum. They needed cash to recover from their debt, and decided to break up their divisions. They organized their other ventures under TJX Companies Incorporated, with Camarada as president and CEO. Hit or Miss alone had 420 stores in the United States, more than Zayre. In sales, TJ Maxx alone outperformed Zayre. They sold off all 400 Zayre locations to their fellow Massachusetts alumnus, Ames, in a deal worth $800 million. Now led by Peter Hollis, former Zayre executive, this buyout made Ames the third largest discounter in the country, right behind Walmart. Hollis had a big reputation on Wall Street, but even he couldn't whip the former Zayre locations into shape, and it ended up contributing to their later demise. In '89, Zayre Corp merged with TJX. The rest is living history. Today, TJ Maxx has over 5,000 locations across the globe, and BJ's Wholesale Club has over 216 states. They founded HomeGoods in '92, and today runs over 900 locations. In the mid-90s, the Melville Corporation reorganized their business around CVS. Today, Melville is the CVS Corporation. In the process, they sold Marshalls to TJX. Yes, they ended up getting Marshalls anyway. Today, it has over 1,000 locations. Zayre will always be a brand worth celebrating and lives on in TJX, as well as those who worked there and shopped there over the decades. They were the ones who made Zayre very good.